Good evening, good morning and good afternoon to everyone present here in Facebook and YouTube Live and here in Zoom. I, Rudranaran Das, take this privilege to warmly welcome to all of you to World Human Sciences and Management Conference 2021 and 22, invitation to global dialogue on agnotological context and disciplinary practices of social science and policy frames, an initiative towards think tanks and rethink episteme. Distinguished participants, partakers, it is a glorious moment to extend my warm wishes on behalf of the Center for Adivasi Research and Development. As this international conference is built with the intent of active and interactive learning and discussion organized by Center for Adivasi Research and Development in collaboration with Indian Institute of Management, Sambalpur, Central University of Odisha, and Ravenshaw University, Cuttack. On behalf of the center, I would like to convey my heartfelt gratitude to our patrons, Professor Dr. Sanjay Kumar Naik, respective Vice Chancellor, Ravenshaw University, Professor Mahadev Jaiswal, Director, Indian Institute of Management, and Professor Sarath Kumar Palita, Vice Chancellor, Central University of Odisha. The convener of this largest virtual conference are Indian historian, Professor Chandi Prasad Nanda, and eminent policy activist, writer, and philanthropist, Mr. Charudat Panigrahi. Dear friends, the main outcome of this conference is to come up with the national and international framework for the education system in future. The crux of this conference will be the use of digital technologies such as artificial intelligence, augmented reality, and virtual reality that is being increasingly adopted after the outbreak of COVID pandemic. We hope this conference would help students, faculties, researchers, and all to expand their mental horizon and help the education system to adopt the best in future. Dear friends, the Center for Adivasi Research and Development is a leading research-oriented institution promoting ethnographic, empirical, and evidence-based research for engaging and addressing the challenges that 21st century globe is facing today. The prime agenda of this institution is to come up with a potential policy solution for social change while believing in the idea of 3D, that debate, dialogue, and discussion, and expertise, experiencing, and education. The institution focus on marginalized communities and work for their livelihood to protect their nature, culture, language, and identity in particular. The age of modernity has witnessed that change is the only constant phenomena for societal purpose to enhance our knowledge. Our information work for them is methodical and avoid paradoxically framework which is neglected so many centuries from theory to become practice. The Center for Adivasi Research and Development sincerely believes in the concept of social marketing, which is seriously looking for non-profit marketing and builds new social entrepreneurship for check and balance mechanism to glorify generations to come. Center for Adivasi Research and Development come to serve with the holistic approach of critical thinking in education to fill the gaps and to plan accordingly for the voiceless communities. Dear friends, it gives me tremendous contentment to introduce the most esteemed personality of today's symposia is none other than Dr. Sreya Sarkar. Dr. Sreya Sarkar is a public policy analyst and a freelance writer based out of Sudbury, Massachusetts, United States. She has worked in public policy research and advocacy in US think tanks like Cascade Policy Institute and the Heartland. She has also collaborated with Indian think tanks like the Center for Civil Society and published numerous articles and op-eds for newspapers and policy blogs. She has a keen observer of Indian politics and writes socio-political articles for Indian news magazines like the OA, Scroll, and the American news magazines like American Kahani. She covers issues close to the hearts of Indian Americans for the Quint, which publishes her monthly column. Sreya did her undergraduate studies in political science from Kolkata's Presidency College and post-graduation from the Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. After a short time as a journalist and a college lecturer in Kolkata, she set off for her second master in political science at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia, United States. So welcome, Madam, to World Human Sciences and Management Conference. The topic of today's discussion is the need for public policy professionals in the field of journalism, which will definitely be an eye-opening session, as we all know that journalism or media is the fourth pillar of democracy. And as a Indian American writer or freelance writer or thinker, definitely we want to listen some wonderful theories and what is the future of journalism in our state of India and United States. As you know that one is the biggest democracy and one is the oldest democracy, but how we can transform the journalism in both the countries and to change the world order, what is the role of journalism and public policy professionals, as your topic said. So welcome, ma'am. Without taking much time, I would stop here and invite you to initiate your talk. Welcome, ma'am, please.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me? Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Thank you so much, Udunarayan. That was a wonderful introduction. Good evening, everyone, all listeners, all participants. First of all, I would like to thank Dr. Bikram Keshari Jaina, the director of CARD, for inviting me to speak at this very timely conference. As you just heard, the topic of my presentation today is the need for public policy professionals in the field of journalism. Now, as we all know, we have entered a dangerous age of misinformation. It is an age of deep fakes, conspiracy theories, and digital con jobs. Basically, it's an era of extreme and hyper-partisan rhetoric. This misinformation campaign is becoming more and more sophisticated with time and increasingly targeting audiences based on their social and political identities. It's triggering outrage, escalating hatred, and unfurling a culture of intolerance, something that we have not seen at this scale before. Now, in 2016, Oxford Dictionary selected the word post-truth as the word of the year. Post-truth is defined as relating to circumstances in which objective facts are less influential in shaping public opinion than appeals to emotion and personal belief. This post-truth world we live in is dominated by things like sensationalism, tabloid news, rumors, horse race campaign reporting. And with the development of technology and social media, the producers and the consumers of news have also come closer, and at times they have merged. Right now, we have news available to us at our fingertips 24/7. But what has truly suffered is the credibility of that news, the quality of that news. So, many of us, instead of questioning what we are hearing, what we are reading, we have simply given up. We have checked out completely. And I think herein lies the importance of think tanks and policy research institutes. They can play an important role, I feel, in re-engaging the general masses. And they have much more power than people understand, and at times even they themselves can fathom. Now, before going into how think tanks are becoming more visible in media and in influencing public opinion, let me try to tell you what think tanks are. It's difficult to define think tanks because Think tank is an umbrella term, including a plethora of organizations, but broadly speaking, their primary purpose is to generate ideas and debate on matters of public policy. They have a two-pronged approach. They act as a research institute or semi-research institutions because of their interdisciplinary and applied approach, but they also act as conveners, bringing together different viewpoints and facilitating an exchange of views. As a result, they're often the view of seminars, the venue of seminars, debates, and dialogues between different stakeholders in society. Now, think tanks, they occupy a very special zone. They occupy this gray zone between high-end journalism and being an actual government official or policymaker. Their job basically is to add judgment and prescription to very difficult and complex policy problems and to communicate that with officials and policymakers clearly. People working in think tanks, whether they're policy analysts or experts, they bring in a very mixed skill set, which is not found in any other institutions. They have to think like an academic, they have to act like a diplomat, and at the same time, they have to write like a journalist. Now, with time, think tanks have also shape-shifted. Policy research institutes have shape-shifted to adjust to the needs of the time. They put out their work generally in the form of long-form white papers. But in addition to that, what they're doing right now is they are starting to put out people-friendly, mass-friendly formats like short commentaries, infographics, and also some videos, relevant videos. And that has brought them with time closer to the masses, to people who want to understand what's happening around them. Now, in 2014, The Economist published an article that tried to capture this changing nature of think tanks. It read, think tanks are the semi-academic institutions that come up with ideas for politicians. The policy papers are meant to be dry. Their wongs more like politicized civil servants than hacks, but increasingly, think tanks are doing journalism, not just blogging and tweeting, but foreign reporting too. Now, certain changes have come about. The mainstream news organizations today, they have their own challenges. They're struggling to meet the demand of providing detailed, trusted analysis on very complex issues facing our world. It's a process that takes time, but that is what they don't have. They have to provide news 24/7. So it's difficult for the news, the mainstream news channels, to come up with detailed analysis. And also there is this threat of losing out ads and their financial revenue. And, you know, as a matter of fact, because of the pandemic and other changes unfurling around us, I don't think that, traditional media will most probably not regain the 20th century heights of funding they had. So they have also, and they had to innovate, they had to shapeshift and change too. The struggles that they are facing have opened up a big opportunity for think tanks and policy research organizations to step up and fill this void. Now, let me tell you a few things, a few points which I have observed how the think tanks have slowly but surely gained a new space, come into a new space. Now, think tanks have gained the ability to assume the role of professional news sources because they have presented themselves increasingly as independent expert sources, even though they represent special interests at times. But that is changing. And right now, they are playing a big role in changing the news ecosystem. They are becoming the new go-to source when students and professionals want to look up certain specialized topics like climate change, like immigration. So what they're doing really well, the think tanks, is they are curating articles and research from universities and other think tanks and putting them together in a user-friendly format on their websites. And this is how they have become a source of news for those who are interested. Now, think tanks are also changing the face of political debate and influence by facilitating something called public journalism. What does that mean? Through public journalism, they are not only informing the public, but they're also working towards engaging citizens and creating public debate. The other development that has happened recently, the last 5 years, I would say, there has been more lateral movement between media and think tanks. Some big think tanks are hiring well-known journalists in recent years as an effort to beef up their their desire to get good writers, to network with media types, and to better distribute information and policy proposals to a much wider audience than they had before. And nearly every influential think tank these days, they have a significant PR operation that is in constant contact with the media in an attempt to stay relevant in a world of thousands of competing think tanks and research organizations. Now, let me tell you, even at the global scale, why think tanks are becoming important when it comes to dissemination of news. Now, two things are happening parallelly, and there's a mismatch between these two trends. There's this mismatch of short-term political cycles and the growing complexities of the world problems. Now, what are the big complex challenges around us? Climate change is a huge thing. Immigration is ballooning into this unmanageable issue, which is getting more and more complex, refugee management. And in this interconnected world we live in, today we require intergenerational solutions and policies to problems that are very complex and that take decades to research. And it takes such a long time for analysts and researchers to come up with solutions. But added to this is the shift that's happening in politics. Politics is also transforming, but moving towards a different direction. It is moving towards a direction that is not conducive to addressing the complexities. What we are witnessing today is very volatile politics, not only in developing countries, but also in the most advanced countries. Electoral cycles have become much shorter, and the politicians' horizons are very short term. It is in this context that fake news and alternative facts have come to play a big role in aiding the electoral process, which is very unfortunate. Now, in such a situation, think tanks might be the only institution that can maintain a consistent and logical voice amidst the political volatility. Research and data collection takes time, and that is the expertise that think tanks bring in. It is the need of the hour, and I'm glad that the world has so many think tanks. In India, the last go-to index that University of Pennsylvania worked on, it showed that India has more than 600 think tanks right now. Now, let me come to the Indian context. We see in India, think tanks fill the vacuum created by short, hurried electoral cycles that have often frazzled the media professionals. That is the reason why we see increasingly opinion pages of leading newspapers discussing national policies like agricultural policies or labor laws. They are picking up more and more opinion pieces from analysts working in think tanks. Now, it is important to understand that there is breaking news and then there is news analysis. Sometimes we are bombarded with all these breaking news, which are just headlines and just the information, but then the analysis, the stuff that takes us behind the headlines and makes us understand how it is relevant for our lives. And that can only be brought about by analysts. And the think tanks are doing a good job in bringing in that expertise. So what we're witnessing right now is that the old school generalist commentators, they are having to share space with domain-specific analysts armed with empirical data and theoretically driven frameworks. And that is also a reason that think tank professionals are seen more often in TV talk shows now, which was not the case before. And also increasingly journalists, investigative journalists who are trying to dig deep and write analytical pieces, they're also quoting think tank analysts, people who have expertise in the field. Now, I just mentioned that the Global Go-To Think Tank Index 2020, prepared by University of Pennsylvania, showed that India is home to more than 600 think tanks, 612 think tanks actually, which makes it the largest country in terms of number of think tanks after US and China. Now, another change coming over at the global level is, of course, the development of technology and how it has reshaped journalism itself. Now, hard news is still the staple of print media and television, as we all know, but because technology has brought in new audiences, it is the younger audiences through their handheld devices and smartphones, they have been brought in, and there's a growing demand from them for storytelling. You would think that because people have access to news 24/7, that they would want quick news, but there is also a growing demand for reading long form stories. So in other words, the good news is that even with all these rapid changes, content is still the king. The younger audiences are curious to know what is happening around them. India has a huge younger population. The people under the age of 25, they constitute 46.9% of India's population, which is huge. So there is a drive from them, a growing need for them to have longer forms, which is encouraging. And also, parallelly, what's happening is there's a growing demand for a gentler storytelling, a calmer approach towards news analysis. There's a growing space for those who are seeking the truth, but with a sense of empathy and compassion. There's also a growing space for spotlighting the good and constructive processes in place. Believe it or not everything happening around us is bad and evil. Not everything is falling apart. The think tanks are good at airing the positive developments. For example, last year, actually in 2020, the new education policy was announced. And it's a long and dense document, which is still being decoded by think tanks like Center for Civil Society, Center for Policy Research. So when such big policy pieces come out, that is a culmination of many years of many governments working together to break, to roll it out. And I think think tanks are bringing out these positive stories, these positive developments, and that is, in the form of a gentler storytelling, which is calming people down, soothing people and giving them hope, especially for the younger generation who sometimes feel stifled with all this negative news that they are bombarded with. They feel stifled, and this kind of gentler storytelling gives them more hope for their future. Another development that has been happening in the maybe another 5 or last 10 years, there has been the rise of regional think tanks. And I'm talking specifically for India. There are certain new think tanks that have mushroomed in areas, in states outside, far away from Delhi. The Center for Public Policy Research in Kochi, Kerala is one such example. They're doing very good work. They do consulting work for the government, but they do maritime research and all those things that's important for Kerala. Then there is a Takshila institution in Bangalore. They have a wonderful training, student training program. Then there are new nonprofits and think tanks like the Gateway House, which is Mumbai based. They are doing good work. There is the Peninsula Foundation in Chennai. They are also, all these new institutions and think tanks are doing great work. And what's important is their research is regional, which is important because what ultimately touches people in the states far away from Delhi are their issues, are their problems. So if there are think tanks that are looking into those issues and becoming a part of the solution, that is something encouraging. And the good news is the vernacular newspapers, the regional newspapers, they are tying up with these regional think tanks, and they are sharing the news that didn't come out before. So little by little, I feel the narrative is changing. It is not all about tabloid news now. There is more space and there is more demand for issue-based discussions, which the think tanks are kind of helping usher in. Now, while researching on the subject, of course, I went through a lot of secondary research and sources, but in the last 2 weeks, I have also had the opportunity to have a few conversations. And these conversations are important because, I mean, everything said and done, I'm here in US, what I read, that is what informs me. But once I talk to people close to the field, then you get a sense of what really India is witnessing right now. Now, I want to mention 2 of these conversations. The first one, I talked to an investigative journalist who is working on a book that she wants to release next year on Indian think tanks. Though her focus is the Observer Research Foundation, ORF, she has also done some deep digging into the modus operandi and the culture of think tanks in India. Now, she has some observations which were quite sobering. It told me a few things and showed me the other side of the story. She feels that think tanks that are really flourishing and getting visibility, the ones who are getting called to talk shows and are being asked to write opinion pieces by newspapers are generally those that have a very good relationship with the present national government. She also pointed out another important thing, that a lot of ex-bureaucrats and ex-army personnel are getting recruited by certain think tanks that are either funded by the government or have a good relationship with them. She mentioned that there are hardly any think tanks presently in India that act as watchdog organizations. Now, that they are in a position to criticize or to challenge the government, that position is just missing in India, and that is a bit worrying for a democratic country. And also, there are no clear lobbying rules in India, and so think tanks often cannot voice their criticism in an organized and constructive way. So these were quite sobering, the observations that she had. Now, another conversation I had was with the founder of a Delhi-based think tank, which ranks pretty well in the global go-to think tank index. He also exposed some very interesting points. He's the founder of one of the think tanks. He said that, time is very important. From 2000 to 2010, think tanks, especially free market think tanks, they really flourished. They did really well. And then the financial crisis set in. And as a result, their funding got cut off and their ideas of promoting market and market-based solutions faced a major setback. So he pointed out that, timing is important because right now, again, we have entered a phase where there is void, where there is a vacuum. So, and he thinks it's cyclical. So there was a point when think tanks were doing very well, and then they subsided, then they became just extension of the government. But now he feels the time is again, it is appropriate, it is the right time to look into new think tanks and new ideas. Now, communication-wise, think tanks have really improved, he said, but the research has really gone down. So the mainstay of think tanks is research. If that suffers, that says something about the think tanks in India and the professionals working in think tanks. So, taking into account these conversations and a few others, the 2 or 3 things really stand out to me as an observer. That first of all, compared to how vocal and connected think tanks are in the US or Europe, and how connected they are to the masses, India is still trailing behind. It's important to diversify the funding, I guess, so that they can work more independently. And I think that is where the private citizens, private foundations in India should get more involved, so that think tanks in India can raise their voices in a constructive way. And also, I think there needs to be a very frank conversation, an open conversation between the think tanks and the government about how being a watchdog is not just about dissenting. It is, you can disagree, because ultimately what you want is good policies for the citizens. And they can actually become partners, government and think tank watchdogs, they can become partners if the intention is to roll out good, effective policies. Now, the other thing that came up in many conversations, and again, there's a vacuum there, is there is a lack of effort to train students to become good policy analysts. Right now, there are not that many academic policy schools in India. Think tanks have stepped up. They are trying to fill this void as well. For example, I mentioned Takshila Institute. It's a Bangalore-based think tank that offers great courses in public policy. They have a very good graduate certificate in public policy that is being emulated by other think tanks as a model. And also recently, Center for Civil Society, founded by Parth Shah, they have helped launch the Indian School of Public Policy. So what's important is, I understand there are ex-bureaucrats and the senior journalists who play an important role in think tank, but what about the next generation? That is where there is a bit of lack of effort, I feel. And the think tanks are working together to fill that void as well. Now, the final point I would like to make, and I want more time for question and answer instead of just my talking and you're listening to it and getting bored. The final point that I would like to conclude with is this. If we want a really vibrant democracy in India, then all of us together have to work towards it. The civil society and the people cannot expect anything to change until they are themselves willing to be part of the change. Now, altering the narrative and the quality of the discussion and news is as much the Indian citizen's responsibility as it is the government's and the media's. Learning how to voice your sane opinion backed with evidence is the need of the hour. Indian masses, Indian citizens are fortunately very politically aware, but now is the time that they should become aware of the policies as well. Those who want to become effective change makers should actively join hands with the think tanks and policy research institutes and make themselves heard. Thank you so much. I'm open to questions. Feel free to ask them right now.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Now I would like to invite Dr. Vikram Kesari Jana to carry forward the session. Before
Thank you so much,
connecting,
madam. Yeah, thank you so much, madam. It's a very wonderful and very engaging ideas said by you. You nicely talked about the think tanks of the global phenomena, and you rightly pointed out the civil society is concerned and what the media people are doing in particular the time of pandemic, and in terms of the new liberal policy is concerned. And as a fine policy activist and a policy intellectual of this global arena in our times, it's really quite sensible when we heard about you. I think you spoke more and a little bit highlight more about your experiences and daily practices, what you call it in terms of these intellectual peoples who has been gathered so many sources in their terms of knowledge, in outsourcing of knowledge or in biased knowledge. But you rightly spoke less time just related to 38 minutes, which is most important. And you rightly pointed out what kind of solution we have in Indian context with 6,000 of think tanks. When you talked about think tanks, I would like to need more on your lights on it particular. Do you believe, madam, in 21st century's life world, we have think tanks in post-pandemic life world? Your answer, madam.
I think think tanks moving forward, think tanks will play a very important role. But what kind of think tanks would come into existence? Therein lies the difference, I think. Right now in India, if you look at the history of think tanks in India, before independence, pre-independence time, and right after, most think tanks and policy institutes that were established, they were government aided, they were floated by the government, controlled by the government. They were more like extension of the government because there was a lot of work to be done. There was the 5-year plans to be rolled out, that kind of expertise and time, and also the skill sets the government did not have at that time. So they had some think tanks that focused on economics and development. Then we see with time, and also in those days, in 1950s only, the TIS was called a different name before, that was established. Then we saw Rockefeller came in during 50s, sometimes 60s. They set up some institutes in India. But then came a period of time when the Indian government did not want any kind of international money funding. They said that we are going to make it on our own. And that's the time when, in 70s and 80s, we see, the rise of think tanks focusing on environmental issues, social issues. Then what happens is, and the reason why I'm telling you this is, it's a journey. You will understand why it's relevant. Then we see from 1990s, suddenly the number of think tanks really, it grew in leaps and bounds. One reason might be that there was liberalization, and the 2000s saw the mushrooming of many market-friendly, free market think tanks in India, and the change happened mostly then because private money started coming in. The funding source had changed. With that, the voices of think tanks and their focus area also changed. Right now, we see so many think tanks, but the pandemic has taught us one thing, that there is a lot of duplication of work happening in India. What is the need of the hour is, not so many think tanks are, there's so many think tanks in Delhi, but the need of the hour is to have more think tanks in the states. There are certain states like West Bengal, that they have so many intellectuals, but hardly even one good think tank that would look into the policies and criticize it in a very constructive way. So I think that is where there is scope of growth in the regional, in the state level. Perhaps more think tanks are going to come up. But what's going to determine the future is the funding. If private foundations, India-based foundations get involved, if the civil society, if this crowdsourcing, if civil society gets involved, we would really, and people are dying to learn more and speak more. So if the thirst is there, if the hunger is there, the only thing missing, I would say, is the funding and a good communication discussion with the government that let us grow, because our intention is to help the government ultimately. So I think the narrative, if the narrative changes, there is a chance that many more regional think tanks like Takshila, like Gateway House might grow, and that would be the future of think tanks for India.
Thank you. Thank you so much, madam. Madam, this is the invitation to dialogue in Mapping Mind series. So we would like to interact with you a few questions from our audience side, and as well the theme for our conference as well. You rightly mentioned about the think tanks, and you the last portion of your talk related to civil society. What kind of civil society you are deal with, madam? Nowadays we have three types of civil society. If you look Mohandatta's work and Samrendra's work and even Deepesh's work and even Ghanshyam Shah's work, we have three civil society. One is state side, one is opposite side, and other is corporate side. And how do you look at the civil society, particularly the 21st century witness the modern world is concerned?
That's a great question, because definition of think tanks is also like, it's very confusing. So what civil society means is also quite a problematic question. Now, I think private money is important. See, corporate money doesn't just mean Adani and Ambani. Okay, there are many there are many private, people who are doing good work. They are into businesses, they are prospering, and they want a voice. They want, basically, if you let businesses grow, then you will have more employment, then you will have more revenue and more prosperity. I think the narrative right now in India is such that market is bad. That market is not going to help people. It's going to destroy everything, especially the welfare state. Now, for that to change, I think the businesses, the small scale businesses, the middle-sized businesses, they should speak up more, because right now they are operating, say, in the different states. They have their own issues while they're trying to do their business, while they're trying to expand their business, employ more people. These are the real world problems that is touching the states and the citizens there. So I think the focus should be on livelihood, and the business owners can talk more about it, and they can coalesce around this need for a local voice. And for me, the civil society that would really, the part of civil society that would really make a difference is this dialogue between private business owners and employees and the local people. So the initiative has to be taken by people who are struggling and suffering at the local level, because the national policies are not helping them.
Thank you so much, madam. Madam, another more submission to add with this question. We have various kind of intellectuals. If you read Vishwanathan and he wrote
I'm sorry.
many, yeah.
I can't hear you. Can you please repeat? It's coming a bit garbled.
Yes. Now you hear me, ma'am?
Yes, better.
Yes, thank you. If you read C. Vishwanathan and Pratap Bhanu Mehta, these people are raised about intellectuality. And particular, when you talked about think tank and civil society, these people are highlighting the absence of intellectuality in our country, particular. In their terms, and I want to know from your terms as well, what is the difference between the public intellectual's role in a strengthening democracy? And then what kind of roles of so-called intellectuals, quote unquote so-called, means the pleasure-wearing academicians, and then the specific intellectuals, those are still even fighting in their forest for the tribal rights and their ethnicity and their cultural promises. And even last and not least, the public intellectual what kind of role make this gentlemen perhaps in 21st century world, when we are closely fight with man versus animal, and people are always thinking really and very serious thinking for these animals first, and not even these male dominating society, or what you call it, the men versus men. And if you as a fine modern architect of policy analysis, if you go to the Cambridge analysis, and many of analysts like Cambridge, Oxford, and even Pennsylvania, and even Harvard, people are always thinking seriously on India, and particularly in imperialism. What kind of imperialism role played by the intellectual to give a damn to these imperialism heroes? Your answer, madam.
There is a disconnect. I understand what you're trying to ask here. It's a difficult question again. You're throwing so many difficult questions, but all important and relevant questions. There is a disconnect, a very deep disconnect between public intellectuals and activists. There are some intellectuals who have turned activists, who have taken up, the flag of protest and march to villages. But there are very few of them. Most intellectuals are sitting in universities, in their ivory towers. They are still kind of seduced by the Marxist way of thinking and understanding things where market is bad, everything should be state controlled because that's the only way to be equitable. So I think there is a disconnect, and that's why we should have this discussion. Who are the ones who are working in think tanks? They are also policy analysts. They have a good research background, but how connected are they to the regions? For example, the farm law, this whole discussion about farm law, it kind of rolled into a political struggle between the center and the state. But how much discussion was there about what the new farm laws were, what they were actually trying to do? They were trying to get rid of the middlemen. They were trying to help the farmers, the small scale farmers who never had any help, who were being exploited. There was hardly any discussion about that. And you're right, the public intellectuals have failed there. They have not discussed policies that have really hurt farmers for decades, and this farm law has been in the making for the last 2-3 decades. It's not just the BJP government, the UPA government before that. They have been constantly trying to shape and change and bring about, go to the next level, and all it rolled out into this big political struggle and strife. So I think there's a disconnect, and the public intellectuals as well as analysts should be called upon and asked for, what excuse do they have? This is a very difficult discussion, Bikram, this is an important and difficult discussion. It's going to ruffle a lot of feathers. It's going to make a lot of people uncomfortable. And I can tell you very frankly, my own state, I come from West Bengal. I hardly hear anyone talking anything about the development of Bengal, about the interiors, about the Sundarbans, about the caste problem there, which has always kind of shoved under the rug. It's a big failure, and I hope the younger generation can change that. Now people who are going to college, universities, now they're coming in touch with think tanks. I really, really hope they change the narrative and they change their way of thinking.
Thank you. Thank you so much, madam. I will beg you shortly because one of our participants, Pritha Raisa, she would ask one question. Please, sure. Madam, ask question direct to madam. Pritha Raisa.
Good evening, everyone. Ma'am,
please unmute your video, please.
I'm actually not in a very well-lit situation, so please excuse me for not switching my video on.
Okay.
Yeah. Ma'am, you stated that it's important for citizens, the members of civil society, to take part in the whole dialogue, this process of policy making and implementation. So as a member of general society, how do we do that meaningfully? How do we engage? Because in this day and age of social media activism, people, the extent of engagement is, I'll post something on social media and that's it, and then I forget about it. So how do I go above and beyond that and do something more? So that would be my question.
Thank you, Pritha. That's a wonderful question, a very relevant one. Thanks for asking that. I'll try to answer that as best as I can. I think you're right. People want to engage, but how do they do that? The think tanks in India right now, they are not doing a very good job in engaging the younger generation. They're writing a lot, they're participating in think tanks, or they're offering these these formal educational courses, policy courses. But what is happening to fill the gap, that void, that people want to engage at the, say, high school level, people who are doing reading political science for the first time, or sociology? There is a lack there. There is a gap there. And I know, for one, there were some policy institutions like Policy Talks right before pandemic. It's a new non-profit, but they were trying to go, they had this program where they went into high schools and colleges, first year, second year, and talk to people and have these day-long sessions, which got disrupted because of the pandemic. But I think they're going to restart that. And following that training model, other think tanks are also trying to go in and engage the students, the younger generation. And then, there are some Delhi-based think tanks like Center for Civil Society who have these internship programs. Sometimes they're paid, sometimes they're not paid. They just have certificate programs. So if you go to, say, Center for Civil Society website, you will find many different courses or just a day-long training, which, if people who are interested in knowing more about the policy world, how policies are made, how to navigate the government corridor, that's a good place to start. But you're right, Pritha, I think there is still a dearth of effort in trying to engage the younger generation, and think tanks could do better.
Thank you. Thank you so much, madam. And thank you, Pritha, for asking such a beautiful question. Now, this is the question from Madam World Human Science and Management Conference Desk. Professor Shubham Das asked, most the liberal democracies of 21st century are in crisis. State machinery, politics, and media trying to wash the human brains by spreading ignorance through false propaganda by most of the brainwashing machine like TV, social media, etc. So that political parties can sustain in power for a long. My question is, what need to be done in the age of post-truth for the growth and sustainability of critical thinking, so far as the acknowledgement contest is concerned?
Very good question. Thank you. Again, very relevant. I think the starting point would be discussions like this, that first of all, acknowledging the fact that what we hear, what is surrounding us and bombarded towards us, it's a lot of noise. It's more noise than news. And at the very beginning of the presentation, I talked about fake news and how the news is being manipulated to serve the purpose of elections and politicians. Now, that takes up a lot of space. And the only way, I think, to fight that, to combat that, is to have more discussions and seminars like this, where people are free to ask questions. And also, I think another good thing would be, and this is at every level, all governments, you write these editorial letters to editors. I think you should question your alderman, your congressman, your politician, your MLA. You should go to them and ask them. I think generally in India, and mostly in India, people are very shy about approaching their representatives and seeking accountability from them. there should be more accountability, and the only way that can increase is once the citizens start questioning their immediate representatives. That's one way of looking at it. The second is the only way of combating bad news is, producing good news, producing good analysis, bringing out the positive, the good things that's happening in the policy field. The new education policy that was rolled out in 2020, there were so many different articles on elections in Bengal, in UP, in Punjab, but you will see that there is a dearth of articles on the new education policy. It was such an important and a landmark, I would say, a landmark kind of policy. So how do we change this narrative? By wanting that more from people. I think the good thing about India and Indian citizens is that they're very vocal, and there's so many of us. I think if all of us demand from the media that we want to hear a different kind of narrative, that we want to hear not so much about the politicians and their personal life, but about the policies that they're propagating or not propagating, that they should. That's the power of people, and we should keep doing that more and more, asking questions.
Thank you, madam. Thank you so much. Second question for you from desk. How to uncover the fabricated fact that generates belief systems among the people by the political parties using artificial intelligence and complex algorithm to get their desired result and sustain in power?
Yeah, as I mentioned, these technologies getting very sophisticated right now, and deep fakes and all these digitally manipulated images and all, it's a problem. It's a problem for even the advanced countries. People are fighting it here in US for a long time. And there are no solutions other than the fact that have more discussions. And other than the fact that now when we want to understand a particular topic, say for example, climate change, then we go to those think tanks who curate articles on that. Whatever we hear in the news, take that with a grain of salt, then go back to think tanks that are, that have made a name for themselves, the ones that do good work, and see what they have to say. And we should ask questions to the think tanks and analysts themselves also. They are very open to questions and discussions. If you read something, and I've done it several times while working here, if I have a question about something, for example, the immigration comes up as a big issue from time to time in US. And there are many people, think tanks working, trying to get good immigration policies across, the ones supporting Indian Americans. It's taking a long time. But what I discovered is when I asked the analysts, they were very open, and they were very open about canceling out the fake news and all that sensationalism also. They would tell you straightforward that, all that is not right. Here is evidence. So only way to fight fake news, I'm trying to say, is by taking the initiative, your own initiative, and contacting those people who are doing some research work on that.
Thank you so much, madam. Thank you so much. This is the last question for today's night and yours morning. You are a political scientist, right, madam?
Yes, I was introduced as a doctorate. No, I did my master's. I did 2 masters. But yes, I took many courses in political science, and I wrote some papers. And then I moved on to policy analysis when I worked for a think tank over here.
Okay. So I think you are the right person to ask this kind of question to you, madam. Madam, do you think how many these politicians, I mean the parliamentarians, even the assembly winners, the MLAs, do you believe these people are quite little bit familiar with this Sarkar Commission, which has been constituted in this last government, and headed by Sarkaria, one of the justice of Supreme Court? Rightly mentioned by you about the farmer law. What happened between the state and center? Do you believe these people quite bit familiar with this, what kind of policy and what kind of relation between state and center? And again, add some submission also for your information. In 1993, one national mining policy passed in both the houses, what you call it, upper house and lower house, the Rajya Sabha and Lok Sabha. Without a single minute of debate, the national mining policy passed because the chronic capitalism impacted huge on this capitalistic approach. And that's the major issue, the policy chunks in Indian history, which has been created a lot of problem for this marginalized community, which are living in forest, which are living in unvoiced communities, which are living in insensitive rights, and which are living in purely voiceless to shout when they are guilty and their problems. Your answer, madam.
So, yeah, it was a long-winded question. Going back to your original question, are the politicians aware of all these commissions and work being done? I think they are aware, you know, but where things get blocked, I'll tell you exactly. There is a party line to toe. Sometimes the party High Commission, they decide what policies will be passed and what won't get passed. I'll give you an example. The farm law, the three laws, the bills that were so tremendously criticized recently, it took the two houses a long time to pass it. But the way it was passed at the very end, without talking to anyone, without any debate, that was problematic. For a democracy, that's a problem. Now, whether, for example, I'll give you another example, police reforms. This is something that has been talked about for ages now. There are good advocates, ex-police people who have been fighting for this. People know, even politicians know, that there have been commissions, there has been research done, so much has gone into it. But where things get blocked is the political will. How does one combat that or defeat that? I don't have an answer for this, really. I don't think there is a lack of information. Even in 70s, the politicians knew what is being done, what was at stake. Even now they know. But if the political calculation is such that they are going to harm a particular population or help a particular population, if everything is kind of driven by this need to win an election, then how can you have any continuity? And this is something all democracies are struggling with. It's not just India. That there are some, for example, the immigration bill, the huge Christmas tree bill in US. For 20 years, it has not got passed, you know. So do people not know? Do politicians and congressmen not know what the problem is and what the solutions are? They do. But there is the biggest block is there's a lack of political will. They think passing that, and it has happened before also, whenever you pass, like the liberalization happened, right? It was a big step. And right after that, the government lost the election. So whenever you make big changes, governments think they're going to lose the election. So that's one of the reasons why, despite knowing what's at stake, how people are getting hurt, how a particular policy can help people, they don't go for it. I don't know if I could answer your question, but that's
thank you so much, madam.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, madam. Thank you so much again from our World Human Science and Management Conference team. You are all the way joining from USA and interact with us in World Human Science and Management Conference invitation to Global Dialogue Mapping Mind series. Thank you so much, and looking forward for future engagements. Good morning to USA and good night India, and namaste, madam. I would like to now
thank you so much.
To go for
thank you so much.
Go for a final vote of thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Jena, and thank you for the wonderful interaction with Sreya ji. now I got this opportunity to conclude this session. I'd like to thank everyone to helping me putting this conference together. First of all, my thanks to our respected speaker, Sreya, for joining us and contributing the ideas on the said topic and the precious time. Thank you, ma'am, for joining with us and then sharing your beautiful insights and concerning your insights for the global change. I have to acknowledge the institutional contributions here, in particular the Indian Institute of Management Sambalpur, Central University of Odisha, and Ravenshaw University, Cuttack. My special thanks to our patrons, Professor Dr. Sanjay Nayak, Professor Sharad Kumar Palita, and Professor Mahadev Joyswal for their motivation and guidance and providing us institutional support, and conveners Professor Chandi Prasad Nanda and Charudatta Panigrahi for their motivations to organizing these kind of intellectual conferences. Special mentions to Dr. Vikram Kesari Jena, Director, Center for Adivasi Research and Development, for engaging such kind of mapping mind series and helping the intellectual world to discussing on the burning issues. Thank you so much, Dr. Dijena, for conceptualizing this kind of program, and I would like to thank the entire CARD team who was providing us such very much knowledge and inputs. I have to be mentioned the names: Professor Srinivasulu NS, Professor Sudarshan Misra, Professor BC Das, Professor Loknath Misra, and Professor Sharad Kumar Raut, and the entire input and coordination team: Mr. Shubham Das, Dr. Nupur Patnaik, Dr. Priti Sriranjan, Dr. Samuel Lima, Dr. Kamal Mahanti, Dr. Neha Sharma, Dr. Shaban Bag, Dr. Nina Das, and San Kashyap for their relentless effort to making this conference a resounding one. Thank you, ma'am, for joining with us. Thank you so much, all the audiences watching us live in Facebook and YouTube, and here a few people are joining in Zoom. Thank you. Namaste, ma'am.
Thank you. Namaskar. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
The session is concluded. Thank you.